character. Okay. So, few basic principles that we have discussed was control the center. The first principle is to control the centers. E4, E5, D4, D5 are the central squares that we wanted to control, right? Then that's how we start the game. We play our pawn to E4. The other pawn comes to E5. Then develop your pieces. The game of the flow is always develop your pawn. Then you develop your minor pieces, either the knight or the bishop. Then you develop the major pieces. That's how we castle and bring the queen in the game. And last is we should develop our king. King is a piece in the end game. Before end game, especially in the middle game or in the start of the game, you shouldn't be moving your king because king is the most important piece and you don't want that to get captured, right? So that is the general flow of the game. We play our pawns, then we develop our knight. Here, black did a mistake by playing his queen to f6. That is, we shouldn't be developing our queen too early in the game. Now, this is what we have discussed earlier. Is everyone aware about this? Right? What happens if you play your queen too early in the game? There are chances that it might get captured. Here, white is following the basic fundamentals, playing the bishop to c4, develop your knight, then you develop your bishop. The queen moved to g6. Queen is attacking two of the pawns on e4 as well as on the g2 square. Now, it is not possible for white to save both the pawns together. Cannot save the pawn to g2, cannot save the pawn to e4. So we have to choose which pawn is important. Central pawn is important, but when we are planning to castle to the king side, g2 pawn is something that we have to look for, right? So here, white simply castled, and he's protecting his pawn on g2. If the queen would have captured, then your rook was also in danger. Now black is capturing the pawn on e4 square, attacking your bishop. What would you guys do in this position? And I want you guys to answer your move in the chat box. This is also a basic fundamental that we have discussed. Try to answer your moves in the chat box. What would you guys do here as white? Okay, Shreyas. Okay, Poshika. Okay, Rama, Shubhra, Neela, Artana. Okay, I got few interesting answers. Okay, one of the common answer that everyone answered is pawn to d3. Now, pawn d3 is doing two things, attacking the queen as well as protecting the bishop. Very reasonable and sounds like okay, it is good. Few answers I got was bishop d3. Now, bishop d3 is violating the fundamentals, guys. We do not move the same piece twice in the opening. Remember, this is the opening part. You haven't moved your knight. You haven't moved your knight. You haven't moved your bishop. So you will not come back with the bishop. Don't move the same piece twice in the opening. That means you're not developing your other pieces. So pawn d3 sounds good because then it opens up the diagonal for this bishop as well as attacks both the pieces. But bishop d3 is not good. One interesting answer I got was knight to g5. Now knight g5 is interesting. Artana said this, right? Knight
Yeah.
g5 does give an attack to the queen, attacks the f7 square, but it is not working here because the bishop will be lost, Artana. If you go directly knight g5, you are aiming for the f7 square. I get it. But the one who's protecting the f7 square will be lost because the bishop on c4 is a free piece. So it is our principle that check out for undefended pieces. Look at the undefended pieces. If you have any, you have to protect it. Here, to your surprise, there's a fantastic move that is sacrifice for a good reason. You can sacrifice your bishop on the f7 square. Now, bishop f7 is a check. We are just getting a pawn for a bishop. But what if black captures the bishop on the f7 square? Now, can anyone give me the idea? Why have we sacrificed our bishop on the f7 square? If the king captures your bishop, what happens? In the chat box. Correct, Shubhra. Correct, Artana.
Done.
Correct, Shriya. Correct, Rama. Okay. Hi, Sanjeev. Sanjeev, we are looking at the fundamentals of opening. So, this is the position, and I'll tell you what fundamentals are we looking for. Okay. So, no Nirved, no Shreyas. Guys, it's a double attack. You just play your knight to g5 and attacking the king as well as the queen. So, it's a double attack. And yeah. What if the king doesn't capture the bishop on the f7 square? After this check, what if the king doesn't capture the bishop on the f7 square? Instead, he goes with his king to d8, or let's say he goes with his king to e7. I want you guys to answer your moves in the chat box again. What would be your answer here? No Nirved, no Pushika, no Artana, no Shriya. That is a better move though, Shriya, but there's something much more good than that. No Shubra, no Shrihas. Okay. Knight g5 doesn't work here, guys, because what happens after knight g5? What would you do? He'll save his queen, just go with his queen to f5, attack the knight as well as the bishop. So, no, doesn't work there. Correct answer in the position would be develop your pieces. Now is the time to develop your rook. Rook goes to e1, attacks the queen. If by any chance the queen goes to f5, then it's a disaster because rook captures the pawn on e5, gives a check and wins the queen. So he won't go to f5, rather, what if he goes to f4? Now, prioritize the forcing moves. This is another fundamental, another principle that you should be looking for. Prioritize the fundamentals. Prioritize the forcing moves. What are the forcing moves? CCT, check, capture, threat. In a position, whenever you are able to give a check, you should look for a check. If no checks possible, then look for a capture. No capture possible, then give an attack. Here there was no capture possible, no check possible. So we gave an attack to the
मैं
queen. The
चला
queen moved to the side. Now we can give a check. Go with your rook
मैं
to
चला
e5 and your. Yes. Is anyone trying to say something to me? No, right? Okay. So check. What if the king captures the bishop? If he does that, now this queen is hanging, right? Play your pawn to d4. You're developing your piece, you're giving a discard attack to the queen, and you are trying to put your pieces on the most effective square. The queen goes back on the f6 square, and now we go in, prioritize the forcing move. We play a knight to g5, attacking the king. It's a check. The king has only one option to move on the g6 square. The other option is the queen captures the knight, but then the queen will be lost. So he's definitely going to play his king to g6. And the time he moves his king to g6, now we can again give a check, moving the queen to d3. Here also king has two options. Either he can go to h6 or he can go to h5. I want you guys to answer me. What happens if he goes to h6? What would you do? No Nirved, no Pushika. No, Artana. Everyone is answering the same move. That is not working. No Shrihas, no Neela,
मैं चला
no Rama, no Shriya, no Shubhra.
Can you
Okay,
explain to me why that move isn't correct?
no. I'll tell you why. Okay, everyone answered it and none of you is correct. The correct answer in the position is it is a checkmate in one move, guys. All of you are trying to move your queen to h3 or knight to e4, something like that. But queen h3, the king can still escape to g6 square. Knight e4, the king can again escape to the g6 square. We don't want that. Right now, this g6 square is taken care by the queen, right? If there's no knight over here, the rook controls the fifth rank. You just want to move the knight and give a check. So give a double check. Move the knight to f7. It's a double check. The bishop attacks the king. The knight attacks the king. So the queen cannot capture your knight or cannot block the check with any of his piece. And then rest of the squares, as I already mentioned, are under attack by your pieces. So it's a checkmate. Knight f7 is a double check and a checkmate. You should have been looking at that double check. Very basic. No problem. What if he doesn't go to king h6, rather he goes to king h5? Now after king h5, we can sacrifice another pawn, push a pawn to g4. Here he has no other option but to capture. If he goes back on h6, then knight f7 is a checkmate. And the time he captures the pawn to g4, queen h3 is a checkmate. If he is not capturing the pawn on the g4 square, he's going with his king to h4. Still, queen h3 is a checkmate. The knight supports the queen every time on the h3 square. Knight is being supported by this, and then all of the squares are under control by our pawn. So these were the general principles that we should be knowing. I am not sure if you guys were aware about these basic principles at this level or not, but okay. This was one thing that we always were looking at our games and we wanted to do. Now we look at some more principles which are advanced. So it is called as night on rim is dim. I always say this while you guys play the games. I say that principle number 13 here is night on rim are dim. Let's see what do I mean by that. So here the game starts with c5 and we push our pawn up. The pawn on d5 is giving an attack to the knight on c6. Now here there are only two choices where the knight can go. The knight can either go safely on the e5 square wherein it is coming in the center, and if we exchange it, he will have a double pawn. And the other option is he can go with the knight to a5 square. Going on the rim, going on the edge of the board will be a dangerous thing for the black pieces or would be wrong for the black, because when the knight goes on rim, he has very few squares to go to. For example, here he cannot go to c6 as we are already attacking it. He cannot go to b3, we are attacking it. He cannot go to c4 because of the bishop, right? So knight is basically doomed. He cannot move anywhere. He will not act as a piece. And in future, what white can try to do is he can just try to push his pawn up on a3, b4 and attack the knight. Eventually, the knight will be lost. Correct? Even if the c pawn tries to trade the pawn over here, it will be lost because the knight will have no good squares to go to. So knight on the edge of the board is not good. Knight on rim is dim. We shouldn't be trying to move our piece on the edge of the board. So what should we do here? What should be the correct idea? If we go on the e5 square with our knight, the other knight captures it and then we'll have the double pawns. Now principle number 14 is we shouldn't have the double pawns. Double pawns are bad in the pieces because then this pawn is a backward pawn and will have no good squares to go to. So how about going knight to d4? Knight d4 is an option, right? Correct. Knight d4, the other knight captures it, and still this will be a weak pawn, but you will lose it. So you will be a pawn down. Now, these basic principles, which I'm trying to explain you, are not only useful for the middle games, but they are also useful in the end game. I'll show you how. Look at this position. In this position, we are playing as white. Black, if you look at this, you will say it's a draw because one single knight cannot give a checkmate, right? So it should be a draw. The knight should be able to control the pawn promotion, and it should be a draw. But no, since the knight is at the edge of the board, he can only go to two good squares at this point. And if it is white to play, you just play on king to f6 and take the control of both the squares where the knight can go. So the knight will never be able to come back in the game, and when the king tries to attack our pawn, we'll simply promote it. He's trying to come up. The king is behind the passed pawn. That means he cannot stop the promotion of a pawn, right? So knight at the edge of the board, knight on rim is dim. You should always try to centralize your knight. Keep your pieces towards the center because that is from where they can go to the most effective squares and control many squares as possible. Let us have a look at principle number 14. So what does our principle number 14 say is that do not exchange the bishop for a knight. I always say this, bishops are long range pieces, knight is a short range piece. You shouldn't be developing. There are few positions in which knights are good, which are called as the closed positions. There are few positions where bishops are good, which are the open position. Because as you know, the knight can jump over the pieces. So in closed position, knight will be able to jump over the pieces. Bishops will not be able to do that. So if a pawn structure is blocked, if there's a pawn chain which is blocked by the opponent's pawn, the bishop won't be able to have enough squares to go to. That's why bishops are not good in close positions, but they are good in the open positions. Let us see few moves in this game. Now he played his bishop to b5. The pawn came up to d6. And now here in this position, you shouldn't be exchanging the bishop for a knight because in white, the light colored bishop is a superior bishop. We shouldn't be exchanging our superior bishop for a queen's knight. Now, queen's knight hardly comes in the game. Why am I saying like this? Because look at this, comparing to this knight will have a long time to come in the game or try to come to protect our king. Here, this knight is protecting the h2 pawn. This knight will not be that great. Our bishop, if it is on the c4 square, attacks the weak f7 pawn. And in future, when the game advances, when we are in the end game or close to um, or in the last part of the middle game, our bishop can then transpose to d4 and give an attack to the h7 square. If he castles to the king side, then we are attacking two of his pawns, which are in the light color square f7 and h7. And we can try to create a battery and give a checkmate on those squares. So, exchanging a bishop for a knight is not a good idea. This is principle number 4. Do not exchange your bishops for the knight. Okay. Also, you do that now. Principle number 15 over here. Capture towards the center. Here, any which ways, black had no options, but whenever you get a chance, you should capture it towards the center. So far, is anyone having any doubt? Anyone has any questions? We
I
have
don't.
seen knight on rim is dim. Do not exchange your bishops for the knight. If anyone is having any question, feel free to ask. Don't, if you are raising your hand, I cannot see that. So, shall we go ahead? Just a second. Okay. So where was I? Now looking at the principle number 15. Principle number 15 says that I was saying it earlier when we were capturing the bishop, we were capturing the knight for the bishop. Do not double the pawns. Avoid double pawns in the game. Let us see what do I mean by that. Principle number 15, avoid double pawns. Push up onto e4, e5, playing towards the center. And now he is playing his bishop to g4, trying to pin your knight on the f3 square, right? Now, whenever the opponent piece comes in our camp, a general idea that we have looked for is to attack that piece. We are playing our knight to c3, and what if the bishop captures the knight? He captures it, there are two options, you can recapture it, either with the queen or with the pawn. You should be capturing this bishop with the queen and not with the pawn. If you do it with the pawns, now these are the double pawns. When two pawns are in the same file, we call them as the double pawns. And by doing that, you're also exposing your king. We castle, we have seen the principle of castling quickly because we want to put our king into safety. In safety, that means behind the pawns, behind these three pawns. If you are exposing your king, there are high chances that your opponent might come and give you some attacks. Then you will have a hard time for your king to go in and save it. The king is exposed. Also, the double pawns are doomed. They cannot, the pawn on f3 will be able to move forward, but you will have a hard time to move the f2 pawn. So you are basically a pawn down, or you will have a hard time to get that piece in the game. That's why you shouldn't be doubling your pawns. Then, looking at the other principle, principle number 16 is develop your rooks. I don't know why I'm not getting it. Okay. So, double your rooks on the open file. Can I click this? Okay. Principle number 16 is double your rooks on the open file. Now, I hope everyone knows the meaning of word open file. There are two types of files in chess, open file and semi-open file. Open files are those where there are no pawns. So in this D file, there is no black pawn or there is no white pawn. If there are no pawns in the file, that is an open file. And rooks are best placed in the open files. Rook's best friends are the open files. We should try to play. Here, White has already captured the open file. He has already controlled the open file by moving the rook to d2 square. If we get a chance to double up our rook on the open file, nothing better than that. So here, if it is White to play, our general idea would be move the rook from f1 to d1 and take the control of the complete open file. After moving your rook from f1 to d1, he will have a hard time to come in the d file because two of our rooks are attacking the d8 square. He won't be able to come to d8 because otherwise his rook will be lost. There are two attackers and two defenders. So he cannot come on that square. When he'll try to put the rook, we'll capture it, capture back, and then will be a rook up. So controlling the open file gives you a good access to go in the game. After rook f to d8, let's say he does a random move. Let's say he goes back with the queen to c7, which is again a mistake because then the rook can come on the seventh rank. Rook d7, attacking the queen. Now queen c7, I asked you because I thought that the rook would come to d8. That is supporting it, right? So if we can exchange his doubled rooks in the open file, we are doing good. Then the rook queen will be on the d8 square. But here queen rook comes to d7, attacking the queen also on the seventh rank and taking the control of the complete seventh rank. Rooks are good in the open file and are better placed when they are in the seventh rank. So that is the principle. Now, these are general middle game principles that you can apply in every game. Just need to remember these principles, not the moves, but the principles. So, if you ever get an open file, you know that you have to put your rook in it. Now, what does a semi-open file means? Semi-open files is when you don't have your pawn, but your opponent is having a pawn, or your opponent is having a pawn, you don't have a pawn, and he's having a pawn. That is the thing, vice versa. One pawn placed in a file is a semi-open file. Both the pawns not placed in a file is an open file. Okay. Rooks are also good in the semi-open files. If you get a chance to move your rook in the semi-open file, attack him or support your pawn, that is also fine. You should be doing that. So these were general principles that would support in the middle game. Now, earlier I was talking about the knights and bishops, how they are better placed if they are in the open position or in the closed position. One general principle I want to show you. Maybe I don't have it over here. I'll draw it. Yeah. So another principle that I was telling you guys was not to, uh, knights are best placed in the closed positions and bishops are best placed in the open position. For example, look at this. Not able to move it. Not able to move it. Just let me close and see. But I lost the game. Okay, never mind. So what I was trying to say is if the position is closed, for example, here, if we push up on upon d5 square, this is a closed position. Why it is a closed position? Because both the pawns cannot move forward. Not the white pawns, not the black pawns. They cannot move forward. So in this position, we have, and after this, if the pawn comes to c5 square, we try to, we should have a knight here and exchange the bishops because then bishop will have a very hard time to go and develop. Look at this bishop. The bishop on g2, g7 will not have a good square to go to. Right now the knight is on the f6 square, which is the best position for the knight. Also, knight bd7 has come over here so that we can exchange the knight. If ever white tries to exchange the knight from b8 would come to f6 and would get it exchanged. That is one thing. The other part of it is the bishop cannot go to h6 because we are having a bishop on that diagonal. So if this square is not open, if this file is not open, then the bishop is doomed. Bishops are bad in the close position. Is everyone listening to me? Are you guys getting these general principles? And in this position, knight will do great job because he'll be jumping over the other pieces. Okay. Today we have learned about few general principles in the middle game. In the next class, we will try to look at few more principles which will be helpful towards the end game. Okay. I hope these will help you play better games and might have cleared uh few of your concepts, that what should we do if you are getting stuck in your games, that what is the next move and what should I try to move here. Will, if you remember these principles, you'll be able to play better. So shall we go and play the games? Try it now.
How much games did we play?
Hmm?
How much games did we play? One or two?
Okay. So I don't know. Depends on how many games you get it. Maybe we are doing it for 15 minutes. But if you guys want to continue after that, feel free to do it. If anyone has any classes and want to take a leave after I am done, you can do that too.
So after you leave, we can also leave.
Yeah, but if you are in the game, you should be continuing the game. Once the game is done, then. Yes, Artana?
Could I go to the bathroom?
Sure. Join and then you should be going because then she already left. Okay.